Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested in New Orleans in August 9th, 1963. And these are his mugshots as we have them. And of course, I think there's a problem with his arrest. And that problem is that on his fingerprint card, if that's what they call it, he is said to have brown eyes. Lee Harvey Oswald, we know, has blue eyes or gray eyes. It's a color that some will call blue and some will call gray. But nobody will call it brown. And yet here on his fingerprint card, he is said to have brown eyes. I would assume that the police officer making out this card does not rely upon the suspect to tell him the eye color, but that he actually looks at the prisoner's eyes and writes that down. Nonetheless, he's given brown eyes here. But as you can see here, in the information provided to the Warren Commission of the arrest report, he correctly is given blue eyes. So there's a contradiction in the evidence. Almost all sources say blue eyes. There's one that says hazel, for this arrest I'm talking about. And there's only one that says brown. But the one that says brown is pretty strong, I think, because apparently it's the original fingerprint card. But here, the Warren Commission is told that prisoner had blue eyes. And this is not the first time that Oswald has been given brown eyes. In 1959, when Aline Mosby interviewed him in Moscow, she noted twice in her notes that he had brown eyes. And this is from the typed-up notes of her Oswald interview provided to the Warren Commission. This and other evidence has given rise to the suspicion, which I have, and certainly others have had and have, that there were more than one person using the name Lee Harvey Oswald, that there are two of them at least, and one of them perhaps has brown eyes, and that would explain why Oswald is said to have brown eyes on different occasions. It would be interesting if the fingerprint card that says he has brown eyes showed fingerprints that did not match the fingerprints we have of Lee Harvey Oswald. And here I put this, with that in mind, I put this graphic together to try to compare the fingerprints of the man in New Orleans and the man fingerprinted when he was arrested in Dallas. The experts say that his Dallas fingerprints fit his Marine Corps fingerprints. And I think there's another set of New Orleans fingerprints that went with the Warren Commission. But in this comparison, the New Orleans version and the best, the New Orleans fingerprints in the best version I can find are not really clear enough to make a comparison, at least not for me. I'm certainly not a fingerprint expert or know much about it at all. From what little I can discern here, I think there's some suggestion they're not the same fingerprints, but I'm not really sure myself that that's the case. If the original fingerprint card from New Orleans were available, I'm sure that experts could make the determination, but I can't. But the arrest photos do look like Lee Harvey Oswald. But as I've noted on here, these are two separate documents. Obviously, the photographs are not part of the card. They may have been added to the card just for presentation to the Warren Commission. You might argue they were part of the card in the New Orleans Police Department. I don't know about that. I don't know if there would be a separate database for fingerprint cards, separate from photography. My suspicion is that there was, and that the fingerprint card was overlooked when the documents were tampered with to make the arrested person seem to be Lee Harvey Oswald when actually it was that other person with brown eyes. I can't prove that, but to do that they would need They, the conspiracy, will need an inside man at the New Orleans Police Department. Eddie Lopez of the HSCA said that the CIA had contacts everywhere, and he meant everywhere. So presumably they would have had contacts in the New Orleans Police Department. Well, here we have an example of somebody who was in the New Orleans Police Department who has connections to Lee Harvey Oswald that we know about. In fact, he was interviewed by the Warren Commission because he was in the CAP with Oswald when Oswald was in high school. And this is from an Israeli publication online. They did a story on him. And this is a photograph of Freddie O'Sullivan when he joined the New Orleans Police Department in 1961. At the time of his Warren Commission interview, he was a detective in the New Orleans Police Department. And at some point after the assassination in 1967, Freddie O'Sullivan converted to Judaism. And as the headline of this article so proudly states, he ended up helping the Mossad. How Oswald's childhood friend found himself in Israel and ended up helping the Mossad. Well, he had a come to Moses moment, I guess, and he converted to Judaism, and he moved to Israel, and he ended up helping the Mossad, and also fighting in the Yom Kippur War, as we can see him suited up for here. And so this fellow, and this must be when he was still in the New Orleans Police Department here, he converted to Judaism in 1967, but he was still, he didn't go there, I think, until 1972 or 3. This looks like the early 70s here. And for what reason, I do not understand. Apparently, he's got a portrait of Leon Trotsky on the wall behind him in his office. The photo is kind of strange here. It looks like it's, maybe it's a joke photo somebody put together. I suppose that's possible, because you can see the left-hand side of it doesn't quite match everything. But whatever, this is from that same Israeli publication. It shows a photograph of Frederick O'Sullivan with a portrait of Leon Trotsky on his wall. I think that's Trotsky. I don't know of anyone else who looks like that. So Sullivan here provides an amazing set of happenstance with his involvement in this matter of the assassination prior to it. And I think he's a great candidate for being a CIA contact in the New Orleans Police Department, and perhaps he could have accomplished substituting of documents to make it seem as though Lee Harvey Oswald actually was the arrested person, even if it was the brown-eyed imposter. So what I'm suggesting here is the possibility that O'Sullivan, in cahoots with Oswald perhaps, as far as Oswald knew, perhaps arrested Oswald under a different name, took this photography, perhaps not on the same date, and wouldn't be the same prisoner number there either, that could have perhaps just falsified the card hanged around his neck. I don't know what the procedures were there, but I think if you have an insider or insiders, things like that could be done. And perhaps these documents that supported the arrested person as being Oswald were switched in with the documents for the brown-eyed Oswald to make it look as though the man arrested was Lee Harvey Oswald instead of the brown-eyed imposter. And in that operation of falsifying the documentation, perhaps the fingerprint card was missed. For whatever reason, I don't know. Maybe they forgot about it, or maybe it was located in a different filing cabinet that they didn't have access to. It's speculative, but it's one of the many possibilities that could explain how a brown-eyed Oswald, a different person, might have been arrested on August 9th, instead of the blue-eyed Lee Harvey Oswald we came to know later. There's a whole lot of evidence that it really was Lee Harvey Oswald with the blue eyes who was arrested on August 9th, and not brown-eyed Oswald. And there's so much evidence that I'm very suspicious that it's all contrived, with the willing participation of Oswald himself. Some of this evidence, of course, I've gone over already, but here's another piece of it. On the very morning he was arrested, he went to the hospital to visit his Aunt Lillian. Yes, I was at that time at the eye, ear, nose, and throat hospital, and he said, "How are you feeling?" And I said, "All right." He stayed just a couple of minutes, really, and he seemed to be nervous-like. And I thanked him for coming, and then he went off. So he puts in this perfunctory visit to his aunt on the same day that he is later arrested. This is in the morning. We know this is Oswald, unless we think Aunt Lillian is lying. This is Oswald. We know he was there in New Orleans in the morning of August 9th. And we know that on the next day, he called his cousin Joyce in the morning. He wanted her to come bail him out. She never did bail him out. I won't bore you with the details of that. But he talked to her on the telephone, and presumably she would know his voice on the telephone. So we know he was there Saturday morning. Also on Saturday, Oswald was interviewed by Lieutenant Martello of the New Orleans Police Department, an extensive one-on-one interview. And then Oswald requested an audience with the FBI, and Special Agent Quigley came over, and they had an extensive one-on-one interview. You would think these people probably would recognize later if it had been a different person, because they had these extensive one-on-one interviews. Oswald was interviewed when he was arrested, but this was an affair that involved having the Cubans present also, with lower-level officers who were not interviewed by the Warren Commission or the FBI. They were interviewed in the 1970s by the HSCA, but they just basically read from their report. If anybody would recognize that this was a different person, it would probably be Martello and Quigley. So I think possibly Oswald himself, by requesting the presence of the FBI and by being interviewed by Martello, by calling his cousin, he is establishing that he is there Saturday morning. And by talking to his aunt, he established that he was there Friday morning. But we don't have this sort of evidence for him being there Friday afternoon and Friday night. There's a period of about 24 hours where we don't have that kind of evidence that it's really Oswald. All we have are these documents I've talked about, and I think these documents could very well have been substituted and corrupted by, as I've explained already, by insiders at the New Orleans Police Department. So what this suggests to me is the possibility that an alibi is being set up here for Lee Harvey Oswald, that he is doing something or going somewhere on the afternoon and evening of August 9th that he wants to have a solid alibi for. And his solid alibi is that he's under arrest in the New Orleans Police Department jail. That's a pretty good alibi. And I think probably, I'm not certain myself, but probably that Oswald was setting up an alibi for doing something. And I think probably he went to Cuba. I have no evidence on August 9th that he did anything, and I certainly don't have evidence that he went to Cuba, but I suspect that's what this is, that Oswald and his friend, the brown-eyed Oswald, and probably O'Sullivan here, and perhaps others, arranged this alibi so that if he was seen, observed at an airport, going to Cuba or going to Mexico City to go to Cuba, that they would know it couldn't be him because he's under arrest in the New Orleans jail. And there is more oddness in the evidence to address, but I seem to be out of time now, so I'll have to do a part 2.